In this lecture, we will examine changes in American politics following the Cold War, beginnings of the War on Terrorism, and the rise of Barack Obama. So let's go to the PowerPoint. I'm going to share the screen. Here we go. Okay. So one of the major realignments in American politics was globalization itself. The Cold War was over. And so this opened up additional opportunities towards free trade. Free trade had previously been an offering to the world to keep the third world away from communism. And now you have the expansion of the American vision of capitalism to other parts of the third world and even into the Russian sphere of influence. You also have the massive expansion of global capitalism. Now, in addition to that, you have, because of free trade, multinational corporations included in their calculus the lower labor costs that the third world afforded them. So you have a large number of industrial plants moving out of the United States into Mexico, into Southeast Asia, into the Indian subcontinent, and to China. Now, part of the reason that globalization was able to work was because at the time, the United States was the lone global hegemon. You had the United States Navy protecting the global oceans in terms of, shipping. And you had a period of low oil prices that made it cost effective to ship products across oceans. Because when oil is high, shipping things becomes more expensive. For those of us who've been aware of the recent past, one of the gum-ups in the supply chain has been that these large supertankers are powered by petroleum products. You had people protesting the expansion of global trade, which they found, and there were two critiques of globalism. One was that globalism perpetuated a new form of imperialism and that it was oppressive to the people in the third world. That's what I would call the Marxist critique of globalization. And then you had the nationalist critique of globalization, which is that you had the deindustrialization of the United States. You have jobs that were previously done, especially in the manufactured goods, jobs previously done by Americans now going overseas to the loss of earning power of working class Americans. And so you had two veins of that critique. And we talked about this. So you had deregulation of the stock market. You also had rising inequality in terms of household wealth. Now, one of the major contributors of this inequality is you had novel technology. New technology creates a period of chaos. This is very similar to what we encountered in the Gilded Age. Then you have a period of winners and losers, and then eventually you'll have a rise of regulation where the winners are codified. At this point, in the 90s and in the early 2000s, you're still on the let's hammer out who the winners and losers are. You'll have another round of that with the novel technologies of the social media, but we're not there yet. Social media, as we understand it, is a product of, really, it hits the market 2008. You don't even have smartphones until 2005. But yes, real wages increase, but you have a rising inequality between rich and poor. You also have a diminution of household income, and I'm going to get more into that in the demographic factors later. We've talked about this already. Here you have the decline of the American manufacturing sector as a quotient of free trade and low transportation costs, because between the free trade and the low transportation costs, for many corporations, it was cost effective to move manufacturing outside of the United States. Also embedded in the rising inequality of income, you had immigration to the United States, and you also had changes in cultural mores with economic ramifications. So you have newer immigrants showing up from different places. Again, you have an increase in migration from the American southern border, from Mexico, Guatemala, and Nicaragua in the 1990s and into the 2000s. Also, in certain parts of the American Southwest, you have Mexican Americans going from being a small-scale minority to being a plurality in many districts in South Texas, in New Mexico, but even rising Hispanic populations in cities as far north as Chicago and New York. Now, this is also very interesting because Chicago and New York also had a previous Hispanic population from the Puerto Ricans that migrated in the 1950s with the mechanization of sugar. And so you don't want to look at American Hispanics as a monolith. You might have in the same city, you might have Mexican Americans, Puerto Ricans, Cubans, and they have different backgrounds, not just culturally and linguistically. They also break differently politically. And so in many places, the two-race system was no longer accurate. Another place where you saw multi-ethnic diversity was, for example, Houston. Houston, Texas, you primarily had African Americans and whites. You have an increase of Mexican Americans, but you also had a large Asian presence. You have a substantial Vietnamese community in Houston, among other large cities. And so one of the things that emerges as a political motif is the idea of multiculturalism, which is kind of a different model than had been perpetrated upon the immigrant before. So you have periods in American history where you have multi-language, multicultural language groups living side by side. And then you have periods of, for lack of a better word, monoculturalism or cultural imperialism. Texas, for example, had many government documents that were written in Spanish or German, depending on what the primary language of the people was. Of course, after World War I, German as the second official language of Texas ceased to be, as you have Americanization of the German population. And so similarly, in the late 90s, early 21st century, you have a period of multiculturalism where the state and where other interest groups are trying to meet other linguistic groups where they are, rather than imposing the language and mores upon them. But this gives rise to a new nativism, especially when the other is seen as not abiding by the customs and mores of the land. The other thing, and this is where you get a little bit of linguistic imperialism. Okay, we define our nationality in terms of our sacred texts. Our sacred texts being, of course, the Americans defining the nationality based on a creed, based on the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. These are seen as tied to the meaning of the words, and that the words are tied to the language. By the way, when you translate from something from one language to another, words change. And so there is an embedded critique of that in a new nativist movement. Now, here we have the map of where people are settling. So here we have immigrant populations in oh, wait, that is not what I wanted. Oh, it's not letting me show the. Here we go. There we go. Sorry about that. I don't want the pen. I want the pointer. So here we have the laser pointer. So you have higher levels of migration to the north at 1900 because this is where all the industry is. And now you have higher levels of migrations in the concentrated cities of New York, New Jersey, California, Texas, Florida. You notice when people migrate, oh, also some to Illinois. And so as immigrant populations are coming, they're not moving necessarily out to the countryside. They're not being evenly distributed. They are moving to the enclaves. And so this is very similar to the pattern of migration that occurred in the 1880s. Here we have Border Patrol apprehending Mexican immigration outside of San Diego. San Diego was a keen draw. There were labor demands in the agricultural sector, for one. Also, Simpson-Mazzoli, which was the period of amnesty where the U.S. chose not to seek deportation of people who had migrated as of 1987 and gave them a path to citizenship. That has had demographic impacts on California. So here we have the origin of the latest immigrant populations. And so here, as you can see, the bulk. So here's 1910. Here's 2013. As you can see, the bulk of migration to the United States has been from Mexico. Here, Cuba is the same. Here, you'll notice that you have Italians going to Nevada, Louisiana. Here in Pennsylvania, you had Austrians. Virginia had British folk, and I am having trouble seeing. Oh, and here you have Russian communities in New York, and the Norwegians moving and Scandinavians moving to Wisconsin and the Dakotas. Whereas here you've had Canadian migration to Montana and North Dakota, and Ethiopian migration to South Dakota. Oh, there we go. So the nature of who's coming in, the language background of who's coming in, this has had effects. One of the things that was kind of interesting to me in the era of multiculturalism was when you had when television converted over to digital television in 2009, it held out the promise of getting more channels, and it did. A fair number of those new channels were Spanish language, and so that had an impact. And I am not entirely persuaded that I suspect that digital television revolution in 2009 galvanized nativist sentiment against the Spanish-speaking populations, because all the new channels were in Spanish, and so it magnified the effect of these migrations, even though, again, if you go to the map, people are not migrating throughout the country. They're migrating to very specific destinations, into very specific enclaves. All right, moving on down the road. So here we have the racial and ethnic breakdown of that. I'm not going. I could go into the demography all day, but I'm not going to. You have over time, legal segregation changes, but you still have de facto segregation based on schools and housing. You have, in addition to African Americans who've lived in this, who've been in this country multi-generationally, you also have immigration from Africa since the 1970s. Moving on. Unemployment by race and sex. Okay, so you'll notice there are trends, but the levels of unemployment change. One of the things that you will notice is higher rates of unemployment among communities of color. You will also notice that, let's see, I want to say, legend on this is not that great. Moving on. You also have, in the 1990s, a drive by both parties, but specifically a drive by a bipartisan consensus on being tough on crime. You have a 1994 crime law that fueled the increase in prisons. And so one of the things about the 1994 crime bill was what was called the 3 strikes rule. If you committed 3 violent felonies, you got life. And so one of the consequences of that was you have a lot more people who are in a lot more prison for a lot more time. And you have an over-policed population, and you have the increase in the war on drugs. So you have a large number of African-American males who had been in prison. And it's a demographic critique and a demographic fact. Now, one of the other things that you have going on, and I kind of want to go into greater depth, in the period of 1990, 1994, 1995, 1996, 1997, 1998, 1999, 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, 2025, 2026, 2027, 2028, 2029, 2030, 2031, 2032, 2033, 2034, 2035, 2036, 2037, 2038, 2039, 2040, 2041, 2042, 2043, 2044, 2045, 2046, 2047, 2048, 2049, 2050, 2051, 2052, 2053, 2054, 2055, 2056, 2057, 2058, 2059, 2060, 2061, 2062, 2063, 2064, 2065, 2066, 2067, 2068, 2069, 2070, 2071, 2072, 2073, 2074, 2075, 2076, 2077, 2078, 2079, 2080, 2081, 2082, 20 1994 to 2012, homosexuality goes from being a criminal offense to having homosexual unions recognized by all 50 states. That's remarkable. So in many states in the United States, sodomy was a crime against the state. One of the states where homosexual sex acts was illegal was Texas. That was, again, using the same logic as Griswold versus Connecticut, where there's this idea of a zone of privacy in the home for consenting adults. So in the Griswold case, in the last unit, we had talked about the Griswold case, where the court found that you had a right to privacy in your home, especially when it came to human intimacy. Griswold was about contraception. The Griswold principle was applied to homosexuality in the case of Lawrence v. Texas, and so laws against sodomy in the United States were struck down. In addition, gay people were coming out of the shadows. One of the rather horrible epidemics that first afflicts the homosexual population and then afflicts the wider population was AIDS. But amid these changes in values on the political front, you have a simultaneous, so you have a liberal progressive rise and their sense of morality emerging, and then you have cultural conservatism spreading their message through novel media such as televangelism. And so cultural conservatism, first with Clinton's Don't Act, Don't Tell, which again, being gay used to be a disqualifier from military service. One of the things that was of concern is, okay, as you repeal, as homosexuals are being recognized, there was a concern that the institution of marriage would be undone. Congress in 1996 passes the Defense of Marriage Act, that's signed by Bill Clinton, the Democrat. Again, this is Clinton being bipartisan. You have in the 1980s through the 1990s into the 2000s, into modern times, an increase of divorce and out-of-wedlock births. Now, I'm going to get to the anti-government extreme in a bit because it ties into a few other things. I want to hit the demographics first, then I'll get to the anti-government bit. Okay, so here we have the change in the family structure. Now, one of the things that again, the textbook authors don't put this together very well. If your divorce rate goes up and if your single parent rate goes up, that means you are now increasing the cost of housing. So when you talk about the wealth inequality that emerges, a contributing factor to the wealth inequality between the rich and the poor is the unstable home life, because divorce is actually quite expensive. Typically, people living in divorce, so again, typically you would have two adult people sharing the same home. Now they're doing separate homes. By the way, that drives up the cost of housing. And rearing children solo, some of you might be doing this. It's a lot harder than rearing a child with a partner. And so that change in the social mores, in the sexual mores, and in the reproductive mores has economic impacts on markets like housing, automobiles, other things, and so the products become more expensive. Okay, this chart's really fun. Median age of first marriage. So, you know, for men and women, the ages have shot up. So from 1970 to 2010, you're going from the median marriage age being 21 for women, and then 24 for men. It shoots up about 5 years across the board, which also means folks are having fewer children. Here we have adult male participation in the labor force. One of the consequences of an increased number of single-headed households or female-headed households is male participation in the labor force went down and female participation in the labor force went up. Now, what's interesting is it kind of flatlines, and what they're observing in the 2020s is female participation is going down, male participation is going up. Part of the thing you also have is unemployment's shot down substantially because of the mass retire out because of COVID. Okay, I want to go to the anti-government militia things and whatnot. Okay, so during the early Clinton administration, you have a push for gun control. You have the use of the ATF to going after rather spectacular gun control cases, such as the Branch Davidians and in Waco. That was a doomsday cult that the ATF decided to do a raid on, not because they were a doomsday cult, but because they were taking semi-auto firearms and turning them into automatic weapons. There was another case of a survivalist by the name of Randy Weaver. Again, you had a really catastrophic standoff when Weaver had his home besieged, his wife and his dogs killed because he had made a few sawed-off shotguns and was caught in a government sting. These were seen as tyrannical to certain people's sensibilities when it came to firearms ownership. And in 1995, Timothy McVeigh, along with Terry Nichols, decided to seek a type of self-made retribution against the government of the United States by taking a Ryder truck, filling it with a combination of gasoline and fertilizer, and turning it into a truck bomb. That truck bomb pretty much destroyed the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City and killed a large number of people tragically and inside it. That is one of the moments when you begin to see the breakdown of the political consensus. The divisive politics of the 19th. So when we think about divisive politics, I know a lot of people want to think about contemporary times. I submit to you that the breakdown in political consensus that we see in the modern times actually has its beginnings in the 1990s. In the 1990s, you have a realignment of the Democratic Party and of the Republican Party, and they begin to express several political issues in moral terms. Gun control becomes a moral issue. Abortion becomes a moral issue. When you start looking at political issues as moral issues, then your ability to negotiate those issues is compromised. You can't negotiate a morality. You can negotiate a policy, but you can't negotiate a morality. And so this drive to make every political issue a moral issue impairs the ability of the factions to negotiate. Negotiation is seen as weakness or as a lack of conviction to the cause. And so you saw the beginnings of that in the 1990s with the healthcare debate and with the gun control debate and with the crime bill. And then in 2000, the morality takes a new turn. So the first thing that you've got going on is Bill Clinton and his impeachment. So initially there was a questionable real estate deal back when Bill Clinton was the governor of Arkansas, and you had the appointment of the special counsel. Simultaneous to that investigation, or shortly thereafter, there was an incident back when Bill Clinton was the governor of Arkansas, where he was accused of exposing himself to a woman by the name of Paula Jones. Paula Jones, while Clinton was president, sought compensatory damages through litigation for sexual harassment. She sued him for sexual harassment and she wanted money. As part of the investigation, as part of the sexual harassment proceedings, it was uncovered that Bill Clinton was having an affair with a White House intern by the name of Monica Lewinsky. When asked about the affair, when he was deposed, Clinton gave, for lack of a better word, questionable testimony. And so what then results of this, Clinton is made to stand trial, is impeached by the House of Representatives for the crimes of perjury for lying in the deposition in the sexual harassment case, which was a federal case. and for obstruction of justice relating to why one would commit perjury. Now, so you have, for the second time in American history, an impeachment of a president. But what's very different about the Clinton impeachment, in the first presidential impeachment, we go way back to our first module, which was the impeachment of Andrew Johnson. The impeachment of Andrew Johnson, Johnson broke the Command of the Army Act. He fired the generals that Congress said he couldn't fire. And he said, yes, I did it. I would do it again because this law is unconstitutional and unjust. I'm the president. I am not obliged to enforce it. So in that case, you have Congress impeaching him. It goes to the Senate. Johnson is acquitted by one vote. Even though he admitted to doing the crime, the question was not, did he do the crime? The question is it worth, was that law actually constitutional? That's what it boiled down to. In the case of Bill Clinton, they have the recording of the deposition that he denied having relations with the intern. The facts of the case, ironically enough, were disputed. The Clinton defense managers disputed the facts of the perjury. So what's fascinating about the two impeachments, neither one of them results in conviction. They both break on party lines, but not entirely. Actually, they don't break on party lines. Johnson was actually spared by a Republican, whereas in the Clinton impeachment trial, he's not convicted because it takes 2/3 to convict, but it wasn't even a majority that voted to convict. But there were costs to it because even to the American people, it was dead to rights. He lied under oath. But he fought it. And I think part of the reason he fought it, whereas Nixon didn't even go to impeachment trial, is because there's no Cold War. You can weaken the country with an impeachment trial. My theory. In the end, he was acquitted by the Senate. Later, he will be disbarred and made to pay a fine because the Arkansas bar was like, no, you committed perjury. So here we have Clinton trying to balance the budget and balance an intern in a rather interesting tightrope. And what was interesting was right after the House had impeached Clinton, Al Gore, who was his running mate, stands out in front of the White House lawn with the Democratic senators who should be getting ready to sit in judgment of Clinton and says that Bill Clinton will be remembered as one of the great presidents of history. And in that moment, when Al Gore decided to rally with the Senate Democrats to save Bill Clinton, that is when Bill Clinton cost Al Gore the election of 2000. Because the entire predicate of the Bush campaign was the moral argument, we need to get Al Gore out of office to restore, we need to get the Clinton legacy out of office to restore honor and integrity to the White House. Now, the election of 2000, and I want to see, I don't have the slide. I'm going to bring that slide up. The election of 2000 was a close election. I'm going to see if I can pull that one up. New window. Here we go. I don't want the ad blocker right now. Okay. Here's the election of 2000. One of the things that occurs in the election of 2000 is you have this idea of the red and blue states. As you can see, it was close. Now, one of the things that's actually kind of interesting is here you have the South voting as a bloc for the Republican, whereas previously the South had typically voted as a bloc for the Democrat, with the exception of the election of 76 and 80 and 84. But again, here you have the South voting as a bloc for the Republican. Here you have the bulk of the American Great Plains voting for the Republican. Here you have the West Coast voting for the Democrat. Here you have the bulk of New England voting for the Democrat. And then your really in-play states are the Midwest, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota. But this actually aligns with traditional voting blocks. what was at issue was Florida. Florida was a close election with questionable ballots. And one county in particular, Broward County and Miami-Dade, had rather peculiar punch card ballots that demanded, due to the closeness, they wanted a recount. Well, one of the things that was at issue was that the counties in Miami-Dade and Broward County were counting in a different way as prescribed by the rest of the state. And so this goes to the Supreme Court, case of Bush v. Gore, and the court ruled that no, those counties can't count their ballots in a different way. And so the recount stopped and Florida went for George W. Bush. Now, it's one of those close elections, but there's another awkwardness to it. While George W. Bush wins the Electoral College, he lost the popular vote. Now, this has happened in American history on a few occasions, but again, Bush loses the popular vote by about 500,000. It's a close connection, and people took umbrage about it. Moving on. Oh, wait, here we go. All right, so that's the challenge to democracy. Now, what's interesting about the early Bush administration is Bush, who was the governor of the Texan state, who speaks a fair amount of Spanish, had hoped and had in his early presidency, in fact, the first state dinner guest to the White House was the president of Mexico, had thought to use, again, this period of American peace to realign the United States more in the Western Hemisphere than to deal with concerns in Europe or in the Middle East. Well, then 9/11 happened. And so we talked about 9/11, which then turns the attention of the United States back to the Middle East. Now, some disconcerting aspects about 9/11 was the use of domestic aircraft as firebombs. And so one of the things that comes out is that safeguards separating the FBI and the CIA and foreign surveillance, again, a lot of these being results of abuse of the intelligence services during the Nixon administration, also hamstrung the ability of these intelligence services to share information on terrorists. So you have the passage of the Patriot Act, which, in addition to giving law enforcement unprecedented powers, that you have intelligence sharing between the various intelligence services of this country. And so you have the NSA being able to eavesdrop on Americans without a warrant. You have, for one thing, you also have the creation of the suspicious activities report. So one of the things, if you move more than $10,000 in cash, your bank has to report that transaction, which makes life decently complicated. And for those of you who are younger, or sorry, for those of you who are older, you know, you got to take off your shoes, you got to get scanned, you got to get pat down in order to get on an aircraft. You have the no-fly list, you have wait times at airports got longer. Now you can't even take fingernail clippers. I mean, all sorts of, fun stuff. And so you have an infringement on people's liberties in the face of a non-national foreign threat. And again, after the catastrophe of 9/11, you have this government willing to do whatever it takes to prevent another catastrophe. And so one of the things that you run into is, yes, the use of enhanced interrogation or torture. Again, this offends people's sensibilities, and it offends people's sense of American tradition. So here you have a picture of Guantanamo Bay before the creation of Camp X-Ray. Guantanamo Bay was a large naval base where you had families and whatnot. And so over time, you have these being litigated out through a number of court decisions. Eventually, you have the enhanced interrogation being found unconstitutional, hallmark case being Hamdi v. Rumsfeld. But unlike the attack on Pearl Harbor, the attack on 9/11, you have a period of political unity. But afterwards, after the passage of the Patriot Act, after the invasion of Iraq, people retreated into their usual moralizing partisanship. And so the divisions of politics in America continue. Those divisions will continue into the election of Obama, and they will persist into our modern time. And on that happy note, even though it's not a happy note, I'm going to end this lecture. In the next round of lectures, we will look at the administrations of Obama and Trump as the global order gives way to the rise of a new nationalism. Thank you.